Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. We are exploring characters in this panel. We want to know everyone's thoughts on what makes characters so powerful, what attracts us to them so much. Why do we keep going back to the same ones again and again? Why do we explore new ones in our lives? So I would like to actually pose one question to all the panelists. When I think back to the books that have left a taste, that have lingered on with me for years, I have some recall of the fanciful setting, some memory of the plot, but what really attracted me, or really stayed with me, were the characters. They're the ones I changed with. So will you share your favorite character, any one, I know there's more than one, but one, and how this character has influenced you and possibly your work? And we will start with Ranjit.
Okay, you've got me in a hard spot because there are a lot of book characters who are favorites amongst mine. But the one that has really come to mind, on the spur of the moment, is William Brown of the William series written by Richmond Crompton. Now, these were books written, I think, during the Second World War. And Richmond Crompton was actually a woman. And she was, I think, writing about her son and his friends. And I think their escapades have stuck in my head ever since. I've read the whole series, and now I want to sort of buy them one by one and read them again. Because they're just full of exactly what a schoolboy is all about, or at least was all about in those days. And it's outdoors. It's, everything happens more or less, everything happens outdoors. He does not know anything about environment, or none of these issues are there. It's just the mischief of being a schoolboy, 11 years old, and he thinks he wants to be brave and all the rest of it. So he's, I think, one of my leading light characters.
Sudeshna, you've read many, many books in your career. Has one stayed with you, one particular character?
I think there are many characters that have come up in the books that I've edited, but those I've encountered as an adult. As a child, I think if you ask what character stuck in my head and kind of set me on my path for a career in children's publishing, it would be Tintin, because this is the it's actually a whole set of characters in the Tintin comics. And we read them as kids, we read them in English, we read them in Bengali. And the humor in the characters, the adventure, the wordplay, the places they visited. And that sort of kind of opened up your mind to the possibility of imagination as well as detailing. And these are stuff that keep coming back in the course of my work. So I think Tintin plays a big part in my head.
I think Vaibhav might agree with you. He's a big fan of Tintin. What is it about Tintin, or any other character that you have great fondness for?
Yeah, is it working? Yeah. Yeah, Tintin, I think the best part about it was, the locations that he went to, and they were so detailed that in one big image, you could digest so many things. You know where he is, what that area looks like, and that makes the character, the surrounding or the people that the character interacts with, everybody is so convincing that, the character gains its importance from all the surroundings. So that was a lot of fun. As a kid, I liked Hanuman. Okay, so he like my favorite character, because for us that Bhagwan angle never came in. We are reading books and listening to stories, like in the previous panels also, they were saying that, it was never like religion. We seeing this huge monkey god who, picks up a mountain and, saves the hero in the nick of time. And so he was like an exciting character for me. And more recently, there's this book called Kampung Boy. It's quite an old book. It's by an author called Lat, L-A-T. So he is like the R.K. Lakshman of Malaysia. So he grew up in a kampung, which is like a village, And the book is an entirely illustrated book, black and white book, and beautiful, his entire life that, from the time he grew up. And it ends on a very beautiful emotional note. And through those illustrations, you can absorb so much about their everyday life, their culture, which is very different. And yet, you can relate to it so easily. Like those soft drink crowns that you crush and make toys out of. So small everyday things that they did is beautifully illustrated in that book, and very nice text alongside. So it's called Kampung Boy, and if you guys get to read it ever, please get it. So the Kampung Boy and the artist, I have a lot of respect. Is a big inspiration for me. I love to tell our own stories in our work. So Kampung Boy is one of my favorites.
Gillian, who would be your favorite?
Well, I mean, it's like an awards ceremony where you're choosing one when actually everybody should get the prize. But I think when I was a kid, undoubtedly from the age of 3, Winnie the Pooh was a great influence. And Pooh and Piglet, and that gentle humor which went with them, and the fact that this was a book which is for all ages. So I still read it every year. It's for grown-ups as much as it's for kids. And the other one that I would also like to mention is The Once and Future King by T.H. White, which is the story of the young King Arthur when he was a kid. And I love that because the main character wasn't just a boy. He was a boy in basically the Dark Ages. So you're looking about a history of about 1,000 years ago. And that age, 1,000 years ago, was fascinating to me. And because he also became a fish and he became a bird of prey, he became a merlin. And the author was an expert falconer. And so when he wrote about birds of prey, he wrote knowing the nature of birds of prey. So I think I learned a lot of love for natural history also through this book.
Oh, wow. It's lovely influence. And it shows in your work. Tom, stick dog, stick cat. Are those your only favorites?
I get asked about my characters a lot. I guess I'll talk about Stick Dog. If you're not familiar with the stories, Stick Dog is the story of 5 stray dogs, and Stick Dog is really the smart one. He leads his friends to food because they're stray dogs. And the other 4 dogs are not very bright. They have really bad ideas. So I get asked a lot about characters, and are my characters based on anyone? And the way I answer that is just to say that, well, I think of myself as Stick Dog, and I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I've never told my family that story, though. Growing up, I was a comic book guy, so I was into Spider-Man and Daredevil and Batman and that kind of stuff. Not real like character-driven, more like action-driven. That's kind of all I cared about back then.
Thank you. So, Sudeshna, we're going to send you the next question, and it's about series. So we've noticed children are absolutely fascinated by series, and it's not something particular to this generation. It's always been that way. But with older series, what I noticed is that there were multiple central characters, like Narnia. Newer series oftentimes focus on a singular hero. Why do you think there's been this shift from the group to the individual?
It's an interesting question. I would imagine a lot of it is also with the authors trying to bring out a certain, a certain milieu. And maybe that's easier if you're trying to build a world. Say like Harry Potter. That's been the defining new character which has come up in the last few decades. And when she wrote Harry Potter, she was talking about this boy who seems quite ordinary, but he is actually not. He's the boy who lived. And through the character of Harry Potter, she is building this whole world. And I think that somehow made it much more multi-layered. she was able to bring in so many other related characters. And when you look at the whole series, then you find that your favorite character may not be Harry Potter. It might be Hermione. It might be Remus Lupin or whoever. But the fact is that she was able to give it a lot more details by focusing on having a central character, but building around that person this whole world, which kind of could work through many, multiple books.
Vaibhav, in your work, because you're bringing word to picture, do you think children relate differently when there are multiple main characters versus one single one? Or how do you find children relating to your films when there are multiple main characters?
I think, as long as the chemistry between the characters, finally it's the story, whether one character drives it or multiple characters. Like say, if you see the Marvel franchise, they're cashing in on linking one character to the other. They're cooking up stories based on that. Like especially now, they're doing a lot of that. Like suddenly Spider-Man meets Iron Man. And they're linking them all up and cooking up new stories. So I guess it's giving them new avenues by using existing characters. Even in say mythology, our own mythology, there's such a intricate network. For example, you know about Ghatotkach at some point that he was the son of Bhim. And much later during the war, he comes back and plays some other role. And so there is a different link that happens, a story link that happens in the audience's head. Like, oh wow, that guy, he's half Asura and he's Bhim's son. And what is he going to do now? Why was he called to fight Karn? So I think it gives a lot of layers to your story and various networks in the author's head. So I guess it finally depends on how the storyteller is going to use 10 or one character. Like even in say Chota Bheem, okay, like say in Indian animation, he has this entire group of people with him, but he's projected as the main character. So I don't know. Finally, it is the storyteller's, talent of using all of them. Sometimes they can all pull the story down, or they can really elevate it.
Yeah, good point. Gillian, this question is going to come to you next. When we think about fiction, we know fiction is something that helps create and develop empathy in the reader. And fiction tricks our mind into thinking that we are actually part of the story. And it wires our brain to show the same type of sensitivity that the character is demonstrating in the story in the real world. So what kind of emotions do you hope that your books will generate or draw out in your readers?
Well, I have only written one book which can be called broadly a children's book. I have written mainly non-fiction, and I have translated Hindi fiction. So in this particular book, which is about a dog called Mishti, I think I want to inspire in readers the same emotions that I have about the dog. This dog is fun, this dog is mischievous, this dog is extremely naughty, and sometimes dangerously so. But there comes a point when this dog is also terrified and has to be looked after. So that is the love and the natural empathy which I hope comes through. And at the end, it's a happy book. I think that comes through too.
Ranjit, in your stories, what do you hope your stories will bring out in your readers?
Well, I want to make the kids mad, make them angry, and make them question that, what's written, what's happening to us is not right. And go to their parents and go to the teachers and shake them up and say, read this and you'll see. We are not always wrong. We are right sometimes in our basic thinking. So that's one of the things. And of course, you want to make them laugh because, they have enough pressure anyway. And this is a little, leave time for them to just sit back and relax and enjoy the story and maybe even become some of the characters which, unfortunately, they cannot be in real life. Because like when you're a writer, you're playing God. You can do what you like with your characters. You can make them as you imagine. So it's I hope that kids can see that and can sort of think that, yeah, I would like to be that sort of a person or not.
So would you say that your books hope to validate your readers' feelings and their emotions?
Well,
Or the
firstly, it
sense of
should make
self?
them aware of those feelings. And then any kind of validation can come later on. But they've got to realize those things. Like, if there is domestic violence or abuse in the family, now you have to recognize that the child has to recognize that this is not right. Because if it's been happening from day one, the child will sort of say that, well, this is the way it is. In every family, probably. I don't know it any better. But when you read the book and when you see this is not what should be going on, that's when the questions then start to come.
Tom, thinking about the characters that matter to you when you choose a book, how do you choose a book?
I think I discover the characters after I pick the book. Like I like books that are beautifully written, but I also like books that are page turners. So I think I read for plot first, and then I discover the characters. And there's great joy in that, because it's a surprise for me.
Sure.
Right now I'm reading a series of 20 books by Patrick O'Brien. And, you were talking about series earlier. And to watch the characters develop over that much time. And I do the same thing in my books, there's a character in my book who really doesn't like squirrels. It's not a very serious character. But it's kind of a running joke. And it's kind of a funny bit. But I finally explain, I think in the 5th book, why he dislikes squirrels so much. And being able to do that is a lot of fun for me. I've thought of writing sort of one-off books, singular books. And I keep coming back to, I like the series more. I like that more.
Sudeshna, what type of characters matter to you?
I think characters that have something to say in terms of what they represent, what value they bring to the entire story that is happening. And also characters who stick in your mind because, you read so much, but there are only certain characters that you remember that, that book had that character. So I think that's a huge achievement when the author is able to do that, to create characters that stick in your mind.
What makes characters sticky? Anyone can answer that. What makes a character sticky? What makes them remarkable so that they stay in your mind? Vaibhav, you want to start?
I think as long as the audience can connect with those characters and they enjoy whatever the character is doing, it will connect, it will be convincing, and they will like it. They'll like what the character is doing. And like I had a very the simple example that they gave was my maths teacher in 10th standard. I had a maths teacher who was damn funny, so I used to doodle that character on the school diary, and later on I started making small Channel V promos with that character, and he became very popular on Channel V. So sometimes the character is so strong in your head that you weave stories with the character, but sometimes if there is a very strong story in your head that you are very eager to tell, then you find characters or people who can play that role in that story. And I always, I go back to my experiences, my relatives, my teachers, my friends, so people from my life, or it'll be a fusion of different people or different characters, or whatever has gone in comes out in my stories. So if it's a story that is triggering me, then I have to look for people that will play that role. So both ways.
So I want to talk about animals because we often see animals in young children's literature. We certainly have Stick Dog and Stick Cat, and we have Mishti. But oftentimes people think that if you are older, you should no longer be reading about characters who are animals. So Gillian, I'll start with you. In all books, animals have human intelligence, but they are still characters first and animals second. Why do you think authors use animals to challenge social norms?
Well, one reason is that, firstly, I disagree because you get older, you shouldn't read about characters that are animals. I think there's a level of literacy which you require to read a book, but from then you can read all sorts of books. And one of my favorites at the moment is called Ganapati Kulpati, which I think is aimed at the 3 minus group. But it's the one that I read most often. So I think that I think that is a mistaken idea. And what I think also that humans have a natural affinity with animals if they're allowed to have it, if they're allowed to realize it. Children have it naturally. And you can say a lot of things through animals in a more humorous way, I suppose. You can make your messages different. But my particular dog is a dog. My dog is not human in any way. So I think, and also I think Prerna Brindra, who's written this amazing book on Indian wildlife and the huge crisis it's in called The Vanishing, which I think older students really should read, as almost something compulsory. She's done a small book about a tiger saying, when I grow up, I want to be a tiger. And I think also she's trying to look more from the tiger's point of view.
Tom, do you think that animal characters help develop greater empathy in your readers than regular human characters?
I think so. And my talking about Stick Dog, there are 5 dogs, and each one is distinct. I mean, they have human characteristics. Stripes is prissy, Karen is kind of frantic and hyper. Stick Dog's the smart one. Poo Poo's an idiot. And Mutt's really sensitive. But what I like to show human characteristics through the dog's eyes. So how some of the silly things dogs would see in humans. So an example of that is, dogs don't understand how humans eat. It doesn't make any sense to them to put like metal things in your mouth, or to wipe the food off your chin when you could have it later. What else? There's a couple more things like that.
Well, especially since we tell them not to put metal things in their mouths.
Right. So one of the things I'm really trying to get across in the books is sort of the ridiculousness of some things that humans do through dogs' eyes. And that's one of the funnest parts. It really has nothing to do with the linear plot of the story, but it gets me a lot of laughs, so I do it anyway.
So, human or animal, Ranjit, all characters must be believable. But must all good characters be a little bad?
Well, otherwise, how will one know the difference? I mean, if they are just goody-goody all the time, then they have to be a little bad because, nobody can be all goody-goody in everything, and nobody can be good at everything. You always have some little chink in your armor somewhere, no matter how good you are. And it would be just so boring if everybody is just very good. What's the point of the story? There has to be somebody you can have a very, very good character who has one tiny flaw, but that tiny flaw is going to turn the story on its head. Because if that tiny flaw was not there, there would be no story. Now, you were talking earlier about animals. Mm-hmm. I've written a lot about animals, and one of the books that I did was called The Life and Times of Altu Faltu. And this is about monkeys. And, all you've got to do is you go to the zoo and you stand out, you look at the monkey's cage, and you don't know whether the monkeys are inside the cage or outside the cage. So now where I live, there were a lot of these monkeys. And I studied them for a long time, how they behave, what they did. and thought I could write a book. I said, and I had just shifted to Delhi. I didn't like the people there very much, including bosses and things like that. So I said, I'm going to write a soap opera with monkeys as my characters. So I had this little monkey called Altu Faltu, who is sort of stoned on cough syrups. He hangs around the university area, and he falls in love with Rani Beti, who is the daughter who's been engaged to a monkey chieftain. So, when he runs away with her, all hell breaks loose. And I had a ball writing that story. Now, a lot of the characters in that story, the monkey characters, are based on people I knew. And the reason I did that was I said that, even if these people recognize themselves in the book as a monkey, they can't take me to court and tell the judge, Your Lordship, I am this monkey in the book. So it was perhaps an injustice to monkeys, but I had fun both ways. And those monkeys are a pest, let me tell you. I mean, they're just like us. Complete nuisance sometimes. They can fight in 1 second, they're making up in the next second. It's, they're just like us.
So enough of monkeying around. Vaibhav is going to show us a 5-minute clip of a movie that he's currently making. And then he's going to talk briefly about what makes characters believable. Vaibhav, will you talk about why these characters are so believable? What is so believable about these characters?
It's things that I have grown up with. So I just wanted to, I know these stories very well. So I just wanted to share these, what's in my head with my audience. And I'm hoping that, they'll be able to connect better. And also because I don't see anything like this in the mainstream, and I'm very, very eager to see something like this. I'm surprised why we are not telling our own stories, especially in the animation sector. I'm not a very books person, more into the film zone. So I'm very eager to tell my stories, whether I'll find out whether people liked it or not when the film is done. So if there is an interesting story, I'm trying to just fit in characters that I encountered in my life, and they are playing those roles. So in this story, there is this, it's not very clear at all, so I don't know whether you got everything in it. But there is a little guy who was very scared to participate in the fancy dress competition because the tough guy always comes as Superman and he wins every year. So, his friends and they all pump him up to become the dinosaur. So then what happens? So that was this sequence was about that.
So, yes, please.
I'd just like to say how much I love that, because I have been a judge on such a fancy drag show. So I can see you take the truth and you just go a little further. And I still remember that was one classic competition because it was in UP, Eastern UP. One of the girls came as Mayawati and the another came as Poolan Devi.
That was fantastic. Sudeshna, for characters to be believable, they must also be very empowered. Actually, let me take that back. Why is it that adult characters are either unavailable or invisible in children's fiction?
I think children get enough of adults in their actual life. So when they are reading a book, that's a space where they own that space. So they can do stuff over there which they're not allowed to or they are not able to do in the real world. And it's a good thing to keep adults out of certain spaces. And it's fun because in certain books, the adults are actually the ones who are creating the problems, or they are there mainly as sidekicks or as, like a humor element. And it's the kids who are center stage. And it's a kid's book, so the kids have to be center stage.
Ranjit, will you speak about that with your work?
It's very easy to do that these days because, most parents are working all the time. They're never there for their kids. They don't spend any time. So the kids can, take full advantage of that, and they do in the books. And I often send my parents off for, some work somewhere for 2 months or 3 months, so they are disappeared from the scene, and the kids can handle the situation as they like. But I'm not bad to all parents, because there are books in which the parents understand what is going on, and they let their children do what they want, saying that you will find out for yourself what is right and what is wrong. I don't have to tell you that. This is the situation. You can behave in whichever way you want, and afterwards you will realize what was the right course and what was the wrong course. So there are parents like that who do understand. In fact, I've done a series of stories where it's about a relationship between a little boy and a girl as they're growing up, and their parents let them do what they want. They say that we'll tell you the boundaries later on when you're at that age, and they do that. They said that everything else is up to you. You know the consequences. You love each other. You like each other very much. If you get up to mischief, you may not like each other anymore, ever again. So you just think about it, and you do what you like. And of course, the kids, being kids, will do what they like. And they will learn whichever way they have to, without the parents. So I'm not all cruel. I'm not terribly bad to all parents.
Tom, is it just natural that stick dog and stick cat have no parents?
Yeah, I guess so. It makes it a lot easier to write. It's a lot less complicated. But I want to get sort of back to that grown-up thing, because there are adults in my books, but the dogs are just trying to steal their food, so they're not really playing a major role. But I think Stick Dog is really the adult of the group, right? So he's solving the problems that the other dogs are sort of giving to him or putting in his way. And I think that's sort of for a reader, it's a way to empower a reader, to let them see how to problem solve and that kind of thing, even when their friends' ideas are kind of childish or kind of just plain stupid. So I guess really Stick Dog is the adult in the room, but the kids see that through his eyes.
Right, because he is the central character. So even if he's solving someone else's problems, he's still going through that journey.
Yeah. And, before I had this career, I worked in politics in the United States. I was the chief speechwriter for the governor of Ohio, which is one of the states. And I worked in Chicago politics for 4 or 5 years too. And I came to realize, now that I'm working with kids, that kids are way smarter than adults, especially the adults in the political world. And I think you could say that's really, really, really true today in the United States. Yeah.
So if Stick
We
Dog...
didn't all vote for him, okay? I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I was like, the thing that bothers me most is the way the world is looking at us now. And Hillary Clinton got more votes. She got more votes. She didn't win, but she got more votes. Thank you for letting me say that.
So if Stick Dog encountered someone and had an alley fight, who would it be, and would he win?
And had a what?
Had a fight in the alley.
Had a fight in the alley?
Who from the political world would he encounter?
Oh God, that's so easy. Are you kidding me? I don't even have to say it, right? Because it'll go on YouTube and I'll get all this hate mail, so I'm not even gonna say it.
So let's move on to a little gentler topic. I want to talk about picture books. Picture books are my absolute favorite books to read. I think they're very soulful. And quite honestly, they're just picture perfect. So Vaibhav, what makes picture books one of the most powerful ways of storytelling?
I don't know, there's a lot of dyslexic audience. So I know, like for me, I'm like allergic to text. Like it's not proven that I'm dyslexic, but I wherever like all textbooks. Wherever I find a soul illustration or something, I get most of the story from that. I'm very, very slow digesting the text bit and putting the story in my head. But as soon as there is a visual, I can connect all that text much better. I know what the situation is. I know what that character is thinking, even if it is one image. So I think, that saying that it's worth 1,000 words, pictures worth 1,000 words, that's so true. So you get everything out of that one image. And even yesterday when I was going through books, some beautifully illustrated books, there's so much that the artist has poured into just that image, and it's not just the storytelling, half of it happens right there. And it's language independent. So anybody can connect with that and cook up their own stories. So I think that's, biggest reason that, visuals will always rule, it'll always connect much stronger.
So speaking of, continuing on with picture books, Sudeshna, I want to sort of speak to the audience about why we should continue. What is the case to read picture books, whether you're 5, 15, or 55?
Sorry, what?
What is the case to continue reading picture books, regardless of your age?
What is the case for
Yes.
reading picture books? I don't know where to begin, actually, because there are so many reasons. But I think picture books help you look at the world in a different way. It helps build values. And at the same time, you understand the importance of language, funnily enough. Because in this last year, for the first time, I was editing a set of picture books for the first time in my career. And I realized that how much you need to edit, how much you need to be clear in what you're saying in that one sentence that you're putting on the page. And that itself is an exercise in learning about language and learning about communication. And that's something that has come to me at 40 plus years of age. So yeah, you can read picture books at various ages, and at each level you get something different to learn from them.
I'd like to ask you all one more question before we open this up to the audience. I think if all the parents look around, there are multiple lists by each author on their recommended titles based on what they've seen in the exhibition. So I know mostly we pick books based on plot, but what do you think, whether you know the book or you don't know the book, what was it about the plot that attracted you to the characters? Or would you think will have very attractive characters or interesting characters? Tom, we'll start with you.
Well, the book that I saw out there, or the books that I saw out there that I love and I still read today, were the Calvin and Hobbes comic books, and those couldn't be more character driven, right? I think Bill Watterson is just an absolute genius, and the artwork is so good. So I think both character and plot drive those, but if you haven't read Calvin and Hobbes books, you should just really read them. Yeah, that's all I can say.
Gillian?
Well, I think most of the books I've recommended actually are non-fiction books. But I have to say that then I come back to Ganapati Kulpati. I came back to so many of the books there where I think the illustrations in the selection here are just visual characters, which I found so amazing, especially because in bookshops I find in India, when I go and buy books for kids, I find the selection is not there. And I think that's one of the problems we have here, is that we don't have the selection available, and whether imported or Indian books.
That's not a problem here today. Ranjit?
Well, characters, as I told you at the beginning, William Brown was one of the biggest ones. I haven't been able to really go through the books in this place too well, but that is one, and Calvin and Hobbes certainly is top favorite. I mean, there's no question about that. And there are other writers who are maybe a little old. There's Paul Gallico, who wrote this book, The Snow Goose. There's Rumer Gordon, who wrote The River, who, those are books that stick in your head all the time. And it's because of the characters in the book. You never forget the characters in those books. Another one is a trilogy. It's the Titus books by this guy called Mervyn Peake. And it has fabulous illustrations. He was talking about illustrations. He has the most dark and dire illustrations in that book. And certainly the best murder scene I have read anywhere. It just makes your hair stands up. And if you're reading at night, you've had it. I mean, there's no sleep left, no chance. So if you can get that book, there's three books. It's a huge fat thing by Penguin. And I don't know whether it's in print, but it's really excellent.
Gorman Gus.
Yeah, Gorman Gus, that's right.
Amazing.
So we can either answer the question or I can open up to the audience. We have 5 minutes left. Would someone like to ask a question? Don't all of you raise your hand at one time. Yeah. Anusha.
I'd love to know what books you guys are reading. What books are you reading right now? Or I think you already told us you don't like reading.
Yes, but I picked up a lot of Amar Chitra Kathas.
Which ones?
I found Indra and Vritra. That was one title I was looking for a very long time, which I want to give to my son. So I'm picking ones that I like, and I'm just hoping that they like it too.
I'm reading a book about Chandraban Brahman, who was a poet, a Persian poet and administrator at the Mughal court. And nobody has really examined all the stuff he wrote before, and he's been a footnote in history, and he's my current hero.
I'm reading this series of 20 books I talked about earlier, but my favorite author is a guy named Mark Halperin. He wrote The Soldier of the Great War, Memoir of Ambrose. I think he's just brilliant. I don't read anything from the age group that I write for, because I'm always afraid I'm going to accidentally use a joke that somebody else that I read. So I avoid middle grade completely.
I'm reading a book called Wild. It's by a British journalist called Jay Griffiths. And it's about, she goes into these wild areas, the Amazon, up north, the Antarctic, Papua New Guinea, all these places where where indigenous people live. And she's trying to sort of say that we have basically lost our connection with nature, and that loss is going to come back and bite us and kill us because we don't know. For example, she says golf courses are life neutered, because they are places where the grass has been completely neutered. I mean, it can't do anything on its own. And that's what we are doing to nature. It's fabulously written. I mean, it started with her going off to the Amazon, and she takes these drugs which those shamans over there take. And, you go on a trip, and she learns a lot from those sort of things. It's amazingly written. It's something I would really recommend anybody who's interested in nature. You just have a look at that book.
To add to what Ranjit has said, I've just finished reading a book called A Life in Wildlife by Ranjit Singh, who is the man who perhaps created more wildlife parks in India and has some more experience over more decades than anyone else. It's a fabulous book. It brings out the wonder of Indian wildlife and natural places. And as someone who was in the IAS and the administrator, it's a real eye-opener to what was done in the decades after independence and what is being done now, and I would strongly recommend it.
I'm actually reading a Bengali book after a long time, and it's a book by an author called Asha Purna Devi, and it's considered to be one of the first feminist stories written in Bengali, and it's the story of this girl growing up in a village, and the entire caste system, the situation of women in the village, and she grows up to be this really strong, powerful woman character. And I've heard about this book since I was a kid. I've never bothered to read it, and I just happened to pick it up last week, and I'm just absolutely loving reading in Bengali after a long time.
how many times have you felt that the character that you had in mind was misinterpreted by a reader, or you think that the character was not what you had expected the character to be?
Well, I think they evolve, right? Especially for me, because I've written them in a series. So I think I mentioned that the poodle in the books is an idiot. He used to just be dumb. He's grown more dumb.
So can I expand on that a little bit? I think if I understood your question correctly, you build a character in a certain way. You mold the character in a certain way. You have dialogues that take place. So you know what's happening in the character's head, and you know how the other characters are interpreting the actions and the language. But when the reader reads it, they read it from a different angle. They have a different experience. So what happens when they come to you and have a completely different interpretation of that character versus the one that you were trying to project?
No reader has come to me with that particular question. But what has happened is, when you start off a book, you have your broad characters in your head, that this person is going to be like this, and this person is going to be like this, and this one is going to be like this. And then you start writing, and your first person does not behave in the way he or she is supposed to behave. He takes off or she takes off on her own. And then the second and third character now have to sort of follow suit. So very often your characters sort of, as they say, run away with the book. But that's the fun of writing, because you don't know till you put the thing down on your computer or on the paper what the character is going to say next and what's going to happen. I mean, in the one book, Crow Chronicles, there's this little tiny tailor bird who's a gin-toting little thing. I hadn't even thought of her, and she turned the whole story while I was writing it. She just took away the whole story. And, she was the one brains behind everything that happened. So it's a wonderful surprise for the writer. And what's even more wonderful is when kids come up to you and they say, how do you know exactly what is going on inside our head and say it in the same way that we would say it? That is the best sort of, then you know that you've been understood. And they may misunderstand a character or whatever, but so far no kid has come to me with that particular problem.
Thank you, and I feel very sad to say that the conversation is only just starting and we have to end it. So thank you for your time. Thank you to all the panelists.